Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we are jumping into a beer from Trimtab Brewing Company out of my birth city, Birmingham, Alabama. This beer is a stout that they brewed for their 7th anniversary, and this one's called Anniversary Stout, so aptly named. It is a coffee cake Imperial Stout that clocks in at 10% ABV. This one was brewed with chocolate, vanilla, coffee, and cinnamon. So no lactose in this, just a big, bold Imperial Stout. Always nice when you see brewers brew themselves a treat for their whatever year anniversary, and I am a big stout fan. So we will start with label art. This one's kind of odd. It's got a flamingo kind of head on there. I'm not sure what the significance of that is, but nonetheless, that's what they put on their label. So this actually has, it is a cap obviously, but it does have a little bit of a wax tip. So we've got our trusty pointy end of our nice bottle cap puller here, which is fantastic. As always, we will just score underneath the wax. This is actually rather thick and sticky wax. So we'll see how well, yeah, that cut a pretty good groove though. See if it gave us enough space to get some leverage here. Yep. No problem at all. Pry that off. I'll just check for any residual. Nope, that's nice, clean, big chunks. So we're just going to spin this around, get it poured right in our nice stout glass here. Ooh, quite thick. Very, very dark. Very thick. This one doesn't seem to be having a problem forming a head. I'm going to slow that down a bit, actually. That head looks like it wants to rise. It's pretty active. As you can see, that head is already going down fairly quickly here. While I'm letting on that settle a bit, yeah, visually, as you would expect, it is absolutely pitch black. Now, I know the camera's not picking it up, but I can tell you on the sides of the glass, the cling, the effervescence, it's mostly fine, but it seems very, very active. So I don't know how well this head is going to stick around. It's just very, very active in terms of carbonation. So I'm going to go ahead and top this off. All right. Refill that. Yeah, it's extremely active. It just keeps rushing up. So I expect it's just going to keep trying to collapse this head, even though it formed pretty well at the start. But that's okay. Let's get right up over this for a sniff. Okay, yeah. There's a lot of roast coming off of this malt bill. A lot of it indeed. And the cinnamon's really jumping out at me. Now, what I do find interesting is cinnamon is one of those ingredients in stout in particular that often you don't get it on the nose. But I'm really getting it quite prominently here, and I'm not really picking up any of that chocolate or any of that vanilla. I'm going to jump back in. Even the coffee, I really can't pick up on the aroma at all on this. It's cinnamon and just deep, richly roasted malt. That's what's on the nose. Now, I'm expecting there to be a lot of different flavors pop through in the flavor profile. Obviously, they added a lot of stuff into this beer, but it's interesting that on the nose, the cinnamon pops out, but the coffee doesn't, the chocolate doesn't, the vanilla doesn't. That's quite interesting. Definitely not the norm. But what I do smell smells fantastic. The cinnamon smells, obviously, of cinnamon, which I love, and the very clearly, deeply roasted malt bill. So let's just jump right in and see what this coffee cake inspired Imperial Stout is all about. Dive number one. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, it's all in there. Really nice beer. Wow. Really, really nice. Really, really nice indeed. So there's a lot happening in terms of the flavor and how these are interworking. It is quite dominant on the cinnamon, just like I got it very clearly on the nose. The cinnamon is a very prominent flavor in this mixture of additives. So before we get to the flavor profile, let's talk body. Let's talk mouthfeel. Texturally and weight-wise, this is a 10% Imperial Stout. It does have a nice heft to it. I would say it feels kind of on the border between medium and medium heavy. It's definitely above average, but maybe not quite as robust as you would expect for a 10% ABV. So it's not a super oppressively heavy beer. Some people might like that. Some people may feel it's a little out of character for a 10%. Imperial Stout. On the mouthfeel side of the equation, there's a good bit of resistance here. You can really feel the thickness of it, that 10%. There's no question when you feel it texturally. This one also is very, very creamy, very silky when you agitate across the palate. So mouthfeel-wise, is spot on. The body is just not quite as heavy as I expected for 10%. But put together, it feels nice. It feels relatively appropriate for the ABV range. In terms of the flavor profile, the cinnamon really does pop out at you very, very clearly. And yes, this is a deeply roasted malt bill, and there was a good bit of roast, and there's a good bit of underlying earthiness. There's no real char notes. There's nothing in this that tastes smoky to me, but it's got this really rich underlying roasty malt bill that has a lot of an earthy side to it, and the cinnamon really pops out prominently. So the other additives here, we've got locally sourced coffee. They mention it's locally sourced. Whether or not that matters to you or not, neither here nor there. But coffee, chocolate, vanilla, cinnamon. That's the additives in this Imperial Stout. The coffee comes through, and it doesn't really pop out at you on the front side, but where it does pop out very clearly is on the back end of the finish. So there's lingering cinnamon. There's this underlying earthiness and roastiness from the malt bill, and the coffee really is popping out quite clearly on the backside. The chocolate and the vanilla popped pretty clearly on the front side. So it's got kind of a ride, a flavor ride that it takes you on to be able to get all of these things. But I kind of see where they're going with this. Like, it reminds you of drinking a cup of coffee while you're eating some coffee cake, which it's been many, many years since I've had coffee cake. But when I do, I like a nice rich cup of coffee, and it does put me in mind of that. It's very nice. And I also like that they just added these nice big ingredients into this big roasty base malt bill without adding lactose. It doesn't need the lactose. You get the spirit of what they're going for here, but it still keeps it nice and true with the nice big hearty Imperial Stout. So I'm going to jump back in. Second sip, we're going to let everything re-intensify, kind of reset the palate here. I'm going to really pay attention now. The flavors are mingling. Then we're going to talk a little more in depth about the finish. But on first sip, I really, really like it. It's a very tasty Imperial Stout. Take two. Cinnamon, really big up front. Vanilla is there. Chocolate's there. Then you start to get that earthy roastiness from that underlying malt bill. It kind of all hits you in the first 3, 4, 5 seconds. Chocolate, cinnamon, malt bill, and it's vanilla and vanilla. And it's really driving this dominant cinnamon and kind of the earthiness and underpinnings of the malt bill. That's almost kind of the main driver. The chocolate and the vanilla really pop up front, and within the first 5 seconds, they kind of dial back and progressively get more kind of, you really got to think to pick them out. And it gets more dominant with that earthy and roasty edge of the malt bill and the cinnamon. As that progresses over time, the vanilla and the chocolate continue to dial back, and the cinnamon and the roasty edge and the earthiness from the underlying malt bill are still ever present. They are not decaying at all. They're not intensifying. They're just not decaying. It's once you hit about that 30 to 45 second-ish mark after each sip that it dies down a little bit compared to where it's been plateauing. And it starts a very slow, steady descent. And it's once it starts the clear descent on the intensity of the flavor that lingers on the palate that the coffee pops out, which is interesting, because I didn't really get any coffee at all on the aroma, and you certainly don't get it on the front side of this beer, but it comes entirely on the back end, and it's what mixes with this leftover, really quite prevalent cinnamon still, and this slight earthiness and roastiness from the malt bill. That's where the coffee finally pops in. So this is a very interesting way that the flavor additives kind of pop in this beer. It's not the norm. Normally coffee is very prevalent, and you get it on the aroma, you get it up front and all over the palate. It's subtle here. The balance of this is, I don't want to say it's off. I would say it's interesting, because everything here that they added is present and accounted for, not on the aroma side at least from what I could detect, but absolutely on the palate. You do have to be paying attention. This is one that rewards you for really scrutinizing what it is you're experiencing, but when you do, it's quite nice. And I think that it's really digging into this beer and what they did with it that really brings to life this kind of coffee cake inspired Imperial Stout side of what it is. You know what they added, but you really get the vibe of it when you take the time and you take the effort to really think about what it is that you're tasting, where you're tasting it, how it comes into play. It's very, very nice. It's a very rewarding drinking experience, and I am a big fan of this one. I love stouts anyway, and I love cinnamon. It's one of my favorite ingredients, and it pairs so well in a stout. And this one, I think they did a great job. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we'll get this beer ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. This was Trimtab Brewing Company's 7 Anniversary Stout. This was an Imperial coffee cake inspired stout, clocking in at 10% ABV. This one brewed with vanilla chocolate, coffee, and cinnamon. Trimtab is based in Birmingham, Alabama. So starting with the aroma. The aroma on this beer was fine. It was fine. It wasn't bad. Just wasn't super pronounced, and frankly, you really couldn't get that much out of the nose. You could get the malt bill, you could get the cinnamon, but very surprisingly, no hints of coffee, no chocolate, no vanilla. So really, it was missing a lot of aromatic qualities from the additives, and it was really just average overall. The aroma, just get a 5 out of 10. For the taste, I really enjoyed the flavor profile on this beer. This was one that you really had to kind of work at to pick up the subtleties and kind of the interweaving, and it was really staggered and layered with how different aspects of the additives and the overall flavor profile came through in vastly different areas of kind of the beer drinking experience. So there was a lot that loaded up on the front, and then there was, you know, this big space in the middle, and then there were elements that only became detectable once we got, 30, 40, 50 seconds in and getting into the finish. So it was very unique in that respect, but I absolutely loved what they did with this beer. I thought it was delicious. Taste gets a 10 out of 10. For the body on this was okay. It was above average, but not quite exactly what I expected for a 10%. The body gets a 7 out of 10. For the mouthfeel on this was really nice. It had the right amount of resistance, felt really nice and creamy, very silky when you agitated it around the palate, and it felt appropriate for the ABV range. The mouthfeel does get a 10 out of 10. For the finish on this beer was quite long. And really on this one, it was the cinnamon, very, very dominant, and these underlying earthy notes that really were kind of the big drivers. But the cinnamon in particular, it was very prominent on the aroma. It was prominent up front and all the way to the very end of the finish on this beer. Finish, just get a 9 out of 10. For the head and retention, this one did okay. It formed okay, but it really didn't stick around that long, and it just was collapsing very, very quickly. This was one that was very, very active in terms of carbonation. I expect if this were pulled off of a proper tap at a bar, it would have been fantastic, but here it was just average. Head and retention gets a 5 out of 10. For the appearance, textbook, absolutely pitch black as expected. Appearance gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance, in general, I enjoyed the balance on this beer, though it definitely was skewed more heavily in some directions than others. For a coffee cake stout, really, I don't know. Obviously, there's not coffee in coffee cake, but for the vibe of drinking coffee while eating coffee cake, the coffee addition in this beer was nice. It was just subtle for my liking. I could say the same thing about the chocolate and the vanilla. You really, really had to work for it. Now, for somebody that drinks a lot of beers, a lot of different beer styles, I thought it was actually very rewarding beer drinking experience, and frankly, I really enjoyed it. Having to really work and really scrutinize what I was getting to be able to pick everything out was really cool. You don't get that often. But in general, even though I thought the balance was above average, it probably, for the average beer drinker, they probably would have been left scratching their heads. Hey, I thought it was supposed to have this in it. I didn't get any of that. Yeah, I mean, maybe just tweak the ratios, the balance of the ingredients. That would be my only suggestion. But I personally thought it was above average regardless. Balance gets a 7 out of 10. Feeling in the intangibles, subjectively, I really enjoyed it. It was a very rewarding beer to get to try, and I enjoyed what I got to dig in, roll up my sleeves, and really work for this one. It was worth it for me. I give it a 9 out of 10. Finally, is an example of the style. Overall, this beer did pretty well. It was above average in most categories, just lost 1 or 2 points in a couple, and then it lost, 5 points in a couple, notably head and retention in the aroma. That is what it is, but even though it seems like this beer lost a fair bit of points, it really didn't lose that many overall, and I do think it is a good example of, a big flavored Imperial Stout. Certainly above average, just maybe not quite for everybody. I don't know the best way how to put into words what I experienced, but I appreciate what they did with this, and I thought it was a very nice beer and a good representative, and certainly a coffee cake inspired Imperial Stout. First time I've had one, I really enjoyed it. Example of the style, gets an 8 out of 10, which brings the total score on Trimtab Brewing Company's 7 Anniversary Stout to an 80 out of 100. So yeah, this is definitely above average beer, guys. I stand by, I don't think it's for everybody. But if you're somebody that really enjoys a unique beer drinking experience and you like kind of testing your senses, your palate, your nose, all of that sounds interesting to you and you really got to dig apart and dissect and really pay acute attention to kind of get everything without it just boom, blowing you up in the face. It's one of those beers that rewards that. I thought it was enjoyable. If that's the kind of thing that you think you might try or enjoy trying, yeah, I would recommend it any day. And even if you just like Imperial Stouts, couldn't care less what flavor, then yeah, absolutely I'd recommend it. It was a very good beer, very rewarding beer to drink, and I, for one, really enjoyed the beer drinking experience. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live, just turn on your notifications, hit that bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.